I just want to get one more thing out there in regards to President Trump's plans for reopening the economy. He did announce that he would be meeting and kind of gauging the interests and ideas here from a few business leaders, as he calls them, across the board in terms of a great American economic revival, the plans here. And Barbara, just want to get your thoughts on kind of this political list he's established on the leaders that he'll be discussing plans with. Your take on that?
Well, picture the list. It's not a little list. It's 200 people, predominantly billionaires or at least millionaires. He's going to bring all these fat cats together and get their advice and their opinions on what he should do with the economy. It's going the wrong way. Imagine just even organizing something like that. It's basically the club that he always wanted to be a member of, the real billionaires club that he couldn't get in, and now he gets to run the show. Doesn't make any sense. What's needed now in a time of crisis, and is always needed in a time of crisis, is true leadership. Some guy making the shot, making the call as what has to be done. You don't turn around and ask 200 people and collect all these opinions, and it's really a vanity group. I just can't believe he would even waste the time doing it.
No, that's a good point when we talk about the way that the money is going to be distributed, because we keep talking about $2.2 trillion in terms of stimulus and where that's going, and the billions being applied to certain industries here, restaurants included, when we saw restaurant CEOs meeting with the president before this was all announced, and then the $350 billion that's likely to run out today when we think about the money going to small businesses as well. So there's a clear lobbying impact when we're thinking about how much this check is and the way that it's distributed. I mean, I guess that's politics. I guess that's the way things go, but I mean, it's not necessarily what you would want to see in terms of recovery and helping out Main Street through all of this.
You know what's the worst part about it is pits people against other people. It's like the big money grab. Who's going to get the money? What do I got to do? Oh, how do I fit in with everybody else? No, it's the wrong way to go. It should be very clear. It should be very even-handed, and it should be very obvious where the money is, really where the money is. Again, I'm going to believe that money I keep reading about the minute I see somebody get the money. I'm not seeing anybody get the money. And remember, Zach, I'm in a good position with a lot of entrepreneurs who have all applied for the money and nobody has it in hand. Pretty upsetting. I'm getting pretty annoyed about the whole thing. Wish I could do something about it, honestly. But I'm not giving them my money. No way.
No, it's surprising to hear. Like we said last time, I mean, with the platform of some of the businesses that you've invested in through the Shark Tank platform, you would have expected a different story there. But I guess, it's not the case. But when we talk about real estate, though, it's another one of those issues when we think back to the financial crisis and the way that clearly there was this impact of everyone was going to be hurt by this if you didn't address the problem. So banks, in the way they were caught in the middle of that crisis, were really the ones that the money kind of went towards to fix all this. Potentially, we're seeing a similar kind of crisis playing out here. When you look at the new updates we've been getting, you can look at the way that mortgage applications are getting more stringent, or the way that home builder sentiment continues to plummet. I'll start with the first point there, because JP Morgan Chase announced that it would be raising borrowing standards for most new home loans. That would take up a credit score of about 700 being the minimum on that front, requiring people to have about a 20% down payment for purchasing new homes out there. So when we're seeing that kind of take into effect, what's the impact on the overall real estate market when you have lenders getting a little bit more careful, considering that they might not know what's going to happen?
Well, the lenders are always the nervous Nellies in any marketplace. They're the first guys that fold. They're the most scared, the guys that get scared first. And in making the requirements more stringent, it's not good for the consumer. It's especially hurtful to the first-time home buyer. But you have to realize right now, not a lot is going on anyway. The markets are basically silenced. There's very few transactions happening, so you're not going to feel any effect of that. Once the market resumes, a lot of people are going to be knocked out of the lending environment, not be able to get the financing for the homes. So it's not welcome news, but it's a typical dance step that happens when there's trouble. The banks run for cover every time. You can count on it.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing out when we talk about that drop in transactions. The National Association of Realtors last month said that home sales could fall by about 10% in the short term compared to what we're used to seeing at this time last year. So I don't know if that necessarily would be all that impactful, as you're talking about maybe fewer sales going through, and what the impact might be for housing prices. If you think about people potentially saying is now a good time to buy a home, you still have interest rates at historic lows, but if more and more people aren't able to kind of compete to purchase your home, what that could mean here. So what's your take on those two things? And then also, if I could throw one more detail in here, we saw confidence among home builders plummet by the largest amount ever, stretching back 30 years when you look at the data to when they began tracking the data. So if you put all these things together and maybe less inventory out there on the market. What would be your advice to people potentially thinking about getting into real estate now?
You're talking about people buying a home. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, right now we're seeing home sales drop, off the
Okay.
short
Well,
term.
first of all, home sales have dropped, but along with the home sales dropping, and no surprise, you can't show a house. A broker can't show a house in most states, with a few exceptions. Buyers can't shop unless they want to commit to a house online, which ain't going to happen. Okay, and all the sellers are scared. More than 50% of the listings in most markets have been pulled off the market. Okay, you might say that's all bad news. The good news in that I see is that sellers have pulled their houses off the market, so it's shrunk the supply. That's going to help us recover when we turn the corner. Okay, absolutely. But for those brave people who are out and willing to shop, or still have just put their plans on hold, which are the great majority of people out there because they have no choice. The reality is when they come to the market, everybody's going to be in the market at the same time. They're going to pay more for the home than they're going to pay now. So the smartest home buyers out there should really be staying involved, knowing their local market, watching all the sales data, and actually shopping online, because then they're in the position to actually recognize a sweetheart deal when they see it. And if they pounce on it, they're going to get the deal of a lifetime. I can tell you that every real estate cycle that has gone up and down, the deals weren't made in the down cycles nor in the up cycles. They were always made in the times when there's greatest uncertainty, where everybody's guessing. And so if you're smart enough to attack the market in that way as an educated consumer and get out there and make a bid on a sweetheart deal, you're going to be the smartest guy that everybody's going to applaud you 6 months from now.
Yeah, and I guess it's also important to keep in mind that a house decision too, if you think about it, I face this too. It's not just one of those decisions where you can make it and expect to turn a house around in a year or two, unless you're a serious home flipper out there that you're going to be walking away a rich man. I mean, it's a serious investment decision if you're looking at it that way. But also, I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on commercial properties as well when we think about real estate and that side, just because the real estate number we got today was just abysmal. When you look at the 8.7% drop last month. Overall, a lot of issues right now in terms of malls, everything else, storefronts across the board. Curious to get your take on the way that could be problematic too. Just when we think about people with mortgages not being able to pay back loans on their homes, the same thing potentially in the commercial space.
I'm more worried about the commercial real estate market than certainly the home market, because with the home market, people get married, divorced, have babies, and there's always a need for change. That's not true of the commercial market whatsoever. What we have witnessed only in the last 2 months is a bellwether change in the commercial market that's going to make that commercial market lose a ton of value, I believe. And here's why. The people who have been working at home have realized that they're not so crazy about sitting in the traffic to go to work every day. It's going to change the desire to be in the office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And businesses are going to realize they have way too much space to utilize, and they're going to want to renegotiate their leases, and the landlords are going to have to deal with them. And what's going to happen is it's going to bring down the value of all commercial real estate overnight. I really don't believe we're ever going to go home to what we had before. It's totally changed. And the only other portion of the real estate market that I think is going to be hit even worse is, of course, the shopping centers. They were half dead. We came into this whole debacle with them on one leg. The other leg's going to be cut out. So I can't even envision what's going to happen to the shopping centers. I just can't imagine.
All right, dire projections there. Of course, it's been the theme that we've been getting all day, pretty much, when we talk about this playing out. But Barbara Corcoran, always love having you on to break down.
Well, end it with a happy question. Come on, you got to get.
I would. We got much more coming on the show, Barbara. We got to continue with that, or better yet, you're gonna have to come back so we can talk about that
good enough.
later on. Shark Tanks, Barbara Corcoran, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Stay well.
Thank you, Zach.
Right now, we're focusing on the way that the PPP program, the so-called Paycheck Protection Program, the $350 billion set aside to help small businesses, is being doled out right now. The latest numbers, $296 billion of that $350 billion has been handed out to small businesses as of about noon Eastern time today. But the Wall Street Journal reporting that could potentially be exhausted. The total $350 billion could be exhausted as soon as today, perhaps issuing a little bit more of credence to Secretary Mnuchin's call to boost funding for the program. For more on this, I want to bring on our friend and Shark Tank host, Barbara Corcoran, who joins us again via the Google Hangout here. And Barbara, when we looked at it, I mean, you talked to us a couple weeks ago about this program and the way that you were worried that half of your Shark Tank businesses might not make it through. So what are you seeing kind of in the way that this money is helping small businesses? Have you seen it actually get handed out? And what's your take on the way that the program's been laid out here?
Well, I'm going to be worrying a little bit more about my businesses that I believe will make it through, because I've surveyed my companies. 17 of them on day one applied for that loan. Only one has heard they're getting money this week. No one else has gotten any money, nor have they heard what kind of money is forthcoming. So when I'm hearing about all this money being doled out, I'm wondering who's getting it. I only have one who's getting it later in the week. I think maybe it's been committed and they're rounding out that word, but I'm going to believe it when that money gets into people's hands.
I mean, I think that's the big issue here too, though, right? Because you're talking about companies that are strapped for cash in the short term. And so, I mean, there are problems that they need to deal with now. So waiting a couple weeks for a check to potentially come down the line might not be good enough. So how does that kind of tie into all this as well?
Well, Zach, you've got that exactly straight. All of these business people actually kept their people on payroll with anticipation that they were going to get reimbursed with this great SBA loan. So think about it. They borrowed money on their own, they strapped themselves to their business, and they didn't let anybody go. And now they're being told, oh yeah, we're getting the money. And now today again, oh, we're going to run out. They haven't heard anything. It's a pretty scary time, even for my most successful businesses who really put the pedal to the metal and went at risk. And I sure hope they see that money that supposedly is coming through. I just don't know who's getting it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the problem here too. You're right in that small businesses were trying to keep employees on the payroll because that's more effective when you think about it, rather than going to the unemployment line and having to deal with that process as well. If you can kind of keep all this, it also ensures a quicker recovery. So a lot of people are agreed on that front. But do you think that there's a sense of maybe being misled here if we're thinking about the government maybe not potentially having enough money to backstop that in the way that they tried to say this would be going out there? I mean, 350 billion sounds like a lot of money, but we've been hearing calls for much more than that. And now potentially the money not being there for a lot of these businesses across the country.
Well, it's tough. Will we get more money from the government? I suppose so, because it seems like we're just printing money like it's meaningless. But I think everybody was well intended with the stimulus package, and they made a lot of promises that they intended to keep. I just think the execution of the whole program is pretty horrendous. Even the unemployment insurance, the idea that they didn't expect that they would have a surge of people applying. Most people who are living hand to mouth right now, the people that were let go, aren't getting their checks for 3 weeks, 6 weeks, some as late as 8 weeks predicted in some of the states. I mean, that's overpromising and under-delivering. In a way, it's more mean than not promising in the first place.
No, it's a good point, especially as people are trying to brace for all of this and hoping for attempts to make them whole coming through. And we talked about that too, as stimulus checks start to get passed out here in the U.S. And you think about, having a business go under is one thing. Certainly, nobody ever wants to see that. But when we talk about Americans themselves, families caught in all this too, there's a lot of problems out there when we think about trying to meet mortgage payments, rent payments, a lot of issues. And of course, we are getting those stimulus checks, potentially in some instances, as much as about $1,700 being given out to maybe single parents with a child. But when you look at that money, I mean, it doesn't sound significant here. But what kind of advice are you giving to people who might be getting that stimulus check? Because, of course, no one's going to get rich overnight off that. But wealth does kind of get built here by being smart with even small windfalls. So what are you telling people to do if they are to receive a stimulus check here and how they should think about it?
Well, the people in the worst position financially really don't have a choice. What they're going to use their $1,700 or $1,200 for is to put food on the table. Single moms who are supporting 3 kids. What do you think she's going to do? Oh, I wonder what I'll do with my stimulus check? No, she's going to feed her kids. If you're in a position where you aren't that concerned about your finances, and too many people truly are, then I think the most important thing to do is pay off your credit card. Especially some of these credit card rates are outrageous. There's no chance that people can get ahead. So paying your credit card in order of the highest interest first is a smart thing to do. But it's not going to do a lot. That's the irony. It's short term. It's a little bit of money. I don't care who you are. And so it's almost like a Christmas present or a present from the government so we all get to vote properly in November. Who the heck knows? But let me tell you something. It's not what it was all cracked up to be by any means.
I mean, certainly a $1,200 check wouldn't necessarily be a lot in the wake of losing your job, or whether or not that's going to be enough here, maybe even on top of unemployment insurance through all that too. But as we talk about the way that the government's been responding to all this, it was interesting because it's not just small businesses and also personal stimulus checks that we're talking about. But President Trump was talking about trying to reopen the economy. He's been talking about that for the last few days here, but he's also focusing in on sports leagues as well. Obviously, a lot of sports fans, myself included, waiting for kind of the update there. It's interesting, though, because he tapped one of your Shark Tank co-hosts in Mark Cuban, along with about 7 other league commissioners out there and team owners, to talk about plans to reopen sports for Americans as we all kind of work from home and try and wait the storm out here. What do you think about what Mark Cuban might be able to bring to that discussion and trying to plan for the reopening of sports?
What Mark's great traits are, he's a straight shooter. He tells it like it is. He doesn't mince words at all. If he thinks there's any risk whatsoever to his fans or his players, he will be an advocate for not opening. He doesn't ever put his wallet first. He's the kind of guy that always does the right thing first. So I think if our president is smart enough to actually listen to him, and I question that as to really who he listens to for more than a minute, he would give him excellent advice. But we don't have a gentleman there in the White House who really listens to people for more than the day. So we'll see where that lands.
Well, I mean, we always invite you on days where we need answers, and because that's, we love listening to you. So, I mean, if you were to give advice on what should people be watching here as we continue to watch rising unemployment claims. I mean, we've looked at kind of the hit to the economy. We'll talk about real estate after the break. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll get into that in a sec. But what have you been watching in terms of, I guess, where the recovery goes from here in trying to time all this out? Because as you noted, a lot of Americans right now are kind of in this limbo mode of uncertainty of, okay, I might have gotten a stimulus check, but what's going to happen to my job? And kind of when is this all going to be over?
Well, I think there's some credence in focusing on when it does get over, because none of us have any control as to how long it's going to last. But there's great credence in thinking about what's going to happen and what can I take control of once the whole thing is passed. And I think the smartest people out there are thinking about what they're going to do for their future job, and the landscape they're going to find when this whole thing is over is going to be fiercely competitive. Because when I speak with business owners around the country, my peers, many of them have waylaid people, but they're not planning on hiring everybody back. They've used it as an excuse to kind of get rid of their dead wood. So once people come back into this marketplace and business gets revitalized, I think everybody should be spending some time right now and sharpening their resume, figuring out what other skills they could build up so that they compete in the future market of tomorrow, whether it be 2 months or 4 months from now. It's going to be a competitive hiring market, and everybody ought to focus on what they could actually change about themselves to compete in that market. I think that's good use of this limited time we have. It's a special time, and it's smart thinking. If you think, forget about what I can't control. What can I control? I can control myself. And what could I do better for myself so that I get ready for the good times when they happen?
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.